Hi, I'm Amara, and last week my cousin fired me. Not because I failed, but because I made the company more profit than she ever did. She stood in the meeting room, grinned like she was granting me a kindness, and said I was no longer aligned with the mission. I gave her 7 years. I built 62% of our revenue stream from nothing, and she erased me in less than 7 minutes. But what she didn't know, the very next day, I would take back everything she thought she stole, and I didn't even have to raise my voice. Before we dive in, tell me, what time is it where you're listening and where are you from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Tuesday morning in Savannah never used to feel like this. The air was still warm enough for short sleeves, but the sky had the color of a cold iron blade. I stood outside the building, my breath catching, as I noticed a new sign gleaming above the entrance. Nora Bio, rebranded overnight, as if my name had never existed. I walked into the brick front building we'd built from scratch. Me with the ideas, Nora with the capital, and nodded at the receptionist who looked away too quickly. I thought it was just nerves for the spring conference. We had our product line ready, the branding perfected, client call lined up for 11. My reusable coffee cup steamed in my palm. I love that thing. Bought it in Savannah on a weekend trip before Mom got sick. The elevator chimed and let me out on the 8th floor where our team worked in quiet harmony most days, but not today. As the doors slid open, I overheard a hushed argument. 2 voices, sharp and urgent, cut off the moment they saw me. "She's here," one hissed, and the silence that followed felt like a blade against my skin. I passed 2 junior staffers huddled near the coffee machine. They paused mid-whisper when they saw me. Someone from HR, Lila, the one who used to ask me for green tea recommendations, was waiting outside my office door, and next to her, Ethan from legal. His arms were folded. My heart tightened, but I still smiled. "Morning, what's going on?" They didn't smile back. Lila spoke like she was reading a script. "Amara, we need to go over some documents with you. Can we step inside?" "Is this about the conference?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan's eyes flicked to Lila and she shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "Not exactly," she murmured, and the vagueness of it made my stomach twist. I didn't even get to log into my computer. I didn't get to turn on the desk lamp I always left off kilter. There was a folder already waiting on my desk. They handed it to me like it was a summons. Termination notice, effective immediately. An NDA that practically gagged me from discussing anything. A severance check that felt like a bribe. For what? I asked, my voice still calm. Ethan cleared his throat. "Nora has received multiple reports of difficulty collaborating with you. Emotional unpredictability. Disruption in partner communications." "Disruption?" I blinked. "You mean the corporate health deal I closed last week? That added 52% to Q2 growth?" Lila didn't respond. Her eyes darted to Ethan. "I bring in almost 2/3 of our Toplin revenue and I get fired 3 days before the conference." "She's exercising her rights as majority shareholder," Ethan replied smoothly. "The board's voting rights are hers alone, per your mother's trust." "Majority shareholder?" I snapped, my calm fracturing. "That trust was meant for both of us. Nora promised we'd revise it together." Ethan's face remained stone cold. "Promises aren't contracts, Amara." "Of course, Mom." "Her just signed this now, we'll update it later document from 9 years ago, the one I trusted Nora to amend with me when the time came." I sat there, heat spreading across my chest. Not from anger, not yet, but the burn of humiliation. She didn't even come down to say it herself. She asked us to ensure it remained professional, Lila whispered. "Professional?" "Sure, like bagging up a body and not getting any blood on the carpet." They left me alone to gather my things. But what do you gather when you've poured yourself into a place for 14 years? I didn't pack much, just the chipped blue mug with "built from nothing" across it in fading script. A notebook of ideas that would never make it to the pitch room. A photo of me and Nora, arms looped around each other at our first pop-up booth in 2012. I took it out of the frame and slid it into my tote, face down. As I packed, a faint knock on the door made me pause. It was Tessa, my intern from last summer, her eyes wide with guilt. "Amara, I heard Nora on a call last night. She said you were a liability, that you'd crack under pressure." I didn't know what to do. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's okay, Tessa. This isn't your fight." The office was too quiet. No one spoke. No one looked at me except for one yellow sticky note left on the edge of my monitor. It said, "I'm sorry, we all know." I didn't recognize the handwriting. Didn't need to. As I walked down the corridor, my heels clicking a little too loudly, I passed the glass conference room. Nora stood at the head of the table, rehearsing for her big presentation. She was using my deck, my script, even the phrasing I'd crafted to appeal to our East Coast clients. It sounded hollow in her mouth. She was reading lines, not speaking vision. I caught her eye through the glass, and for a split second her mask slipped. A flicker of fear, quickly buried under a practiced smile. "Keep walking, Amara," she mouthed, her voice inaudible but her lips clear. I froze, my hand tightening on my tote. I didn't go in. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her for a moment behind the glass, and I realized she'd been practicing how to become me. And now she was discarding me like a rehearsal note. I didn't cry. Not then. I just adjusted my scarf, nodded once to my own reflection, and walked to the elevator. But walking out that brick door wasn't the worst part. It was the silence that followed. The sound of the elevator door closing still echoed in my ears when I reached home that Tuesday night. In my apartment, I found a voicemail from an old colleague, Marcus. His voice low and urgent. "Amara, Nora's already spinning this. She told the board you resigned voluntarily. I tried to set the record straight, but be careful, she's not stopping." I deleted it, my hands trembling. But it wasn't until the next morning, when the sun filtered through the blinds in my quiet apartment in Pooler, that the real weight hit me. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in yesterday's jeans, scrolling through the dozens of notifications lighting up my phone. LinkedIn was already ablaze with congratulatory posts about the new leadership direction at the company. A photo of Nora at the conference podium, all white teeth and borrowed phrases, was at the top of my feed. Not a word from her, not a single message or email since I was walked out like a stranger. I stood and walked to the kitchen, flipping on the kettle. My hand reached instinctively for the chipped blue mug, built from nothing, still standing, still mine. It's funny, I thought. The world expects women like me, who build, who bend, who believe, to absorb betrayal like it's part of the job. We're supposed to take it with grace, smile, light a candle, journal about it, maybe post some yoga quote about growth and resilience. But not today. Today, I let the bitterness sit beside my coffee. I didn't dress, I didn't shower, I just sat in my kitchen, wrapped in my robe, and remembered. Because the truth is, this wasn't the first time Nora had tried to erase me. 3 years ago, we were celebrating our Series B funding round. Mom had passed just 8 months earlier, and Nora had just taken over as CEO. Per her will, her shares went to her. At the time, I hadn't thought to question it. We were cousins, blood. She'd promised we'd update the structure together, that I'd always have a say. That night, she threw a dinner at the Pier rooftop downtown. Fancy spot, candlelit, and full of investors who couldn't stop talking over each other. I was seated 3 chairs away from Nora. She stood to toast, thanked the design team, the CFO, even our HR lead. She never mentioned me. When I nudged her about it afterward, she smiled and said, "Amara, everyone knows you're the soul of this company. I didn't have to say it." But later that night I overheard her in the hallway, laughing with an investor. "Amara's too soft for this game," she said. "She builds, I win." The words burned, but I swallowed them, thinking family meant loyalty. Later that week, she quietly proposed a board vote to dilute my share by issuing new options for executive retention. I confronted her in the office. This cuts me from 38% to 22%. That's not retention, that's a slow exit. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Come on, you'll always be part of this. Titles don't matter. We're family. I pushed back hard, got Silas involved. The vote was tabled. Nora backed off, but the smirk she gave me in the hallway that day, it still haunts me. It didn't say you win, it said not yet. I was never her cousin in the business. I was her placeholder until she figured out how to stand there alone. A knock pulled me out of my memory. I checked the time, 8:15. No one ever knocked that early except one person, Zara. My goddaughter stepped in, her long braid draped over one shoulder, holding 2 takeout cups and a bag of croissants. Mom said, "You might need this." I took the coffee with a nod, then pulled her into a hug. She held on tighter than usual. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm breathing. That's something." Zara didn't ask more. She never did. That was one of the gifts she inherited from her mom, knowing when silence held more comfort than answers. But then she hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Amara, Mom heard something at the market yesterday. Nora's telling people you were unstable, that you sabotaged a deal last year. Is she always like this?" I forced a smile, but my voice was tight. "She's good at stories, Zara, always has been." She sat with me while I forced down half a croissant. We watched morning news drone on about supply chain delays and political scandals. But my mind wasn't in that room. It buzzed when my phone vibrated again. A name lit up the screen. Dr. Felix Hart. He was my biggest client. His health clinics across 4 states accounted for nearly $3,200,000, 0 cents of our annual revenue. Nora had never met him. He'd always worked through me. I opened the message with trembling fingers. "Heard you're no longer on the team. I signed with you, not the brand. Let me know where we can talk." I stared at it. I read it again. Then Zara leaned over. "Good news. Better than good. They fired me, kicked me out, tried to erase me from the narrative. But clients like Felix, people who had seen me work, trusted me, weren't buying it. They can take my name off the slides, strip me from the payroll, but they can't undo the relationships I built, the loyalty I earned." And that's when the ember flickered, just a spark, but real. So while Nora toasted herself on stage, I made my first move, quiet but irreversible. The first move wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. And it started with one name, Silas. We met the next morning at a small bookstore cafe tucked off Bay Street, the kind of place that smelled like worn paper and espresso beans. The city was just waking up, slow and misty, and inside, the low murmur of conversation blanketed the corner table we always used when we didn't want to be found. Silas was already there, back to the wall, eyes scanning the front like habit. He never said much more than needed. His strength wasn't in noise but precision. I slid into the seat across from him, dropped my bag without a word. He pushed a cappuccino toward me. "No sugar. Still how you like it." I nodded, then met his eyes. "What did you find?" He flipped open his laptop, tilting the screen toward me as he shielded it with a folded menu. That gesture alone made my heart beat faster. Silas never shielded screens unless it was serious. "She's been funneling money, consulting contracts, through a shell vendor." His voice was barely above a whisper. 3 board votes were bypassed entirely. My stomach didn't drop, my hands didn't shake. Instead, I stirred the coffee slowly, keeping my rhythm, even as the spoon clinked against the porcelain just a little too sharply. Who signed off? She did, under executive override. But the amount, Amara, it's not petty cash. We're talking 7 figures over 12 months. 7 figures? I whispered, my voice catching. Silas, she's been siphoning funds while I was closing deals? He nodded, his jaw tight. And she's got a board member in her pocket, Carter. He's been signing off without question. I stared at the screen. A shell vendor, some fabricated LLC. Nora had always been careful, but never clever enough to remember I knew her patterns better than anyone. She played checkers while thinking she was playing chess. I didn't react, just nodded. Send me the documents, I said. Let me cross-check something. Silas paused. You're not thinking lawsuit yet? Not yet, I said. I'm thinking leverage. By noon, I was back at my apartment, sleeves rolled, hair tied, boxes of archived files scattered across the floor. I hadn't opened these in years. I didn't need to, my memory was too good. I just needed confirmation. 4 boxes in, I found it. A green folder marked 2019 Conflict Resolution NDA drafts. It was the year Nora tried to force me into silence during a dispute with an early investor. I'd fought her on it. Every red line, every clause. We went back and forth for 3 months before I finally signed the version she insisted was final. But I never threw out the drafts. I opened each one, scanning quickly, and then I saw it. In the 3rd version, she emailed dated 4 weeks before the signed copy. Clause 15C. In any instance where financial decisions bypass board protocol, both parties must disclose the transaction within 45 days to avoid breach of agreement penalties. She wrote that she fought to keep it in, said it protected both of us, and she never removed it from the final version. I laughed. Quiet and bitter. She used this to trap me, I whispered to the empty room, and now it's going to trap her. I pulled out my scanner, hands steadier than they had been in days. Within minutes, the file was digitized, labeled, and ready. I sent it to Silas without commentary. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. You always were the real architect. I just built where you pointed. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I hadn't expected that message, but maybe I'd needed it more than I knew. As I closed the laptop, my phone pinged again. An anonymous email, no subject. Check Nora's cloud drive, folder labeled consulting, password Victory 2023. My pulse raced. Someone inside was turning on her. Before closing the laptop, I glanced at my inbox. 6 unread emails from interns who had worked under me over the years, simple subject lines. Thinking of you. Thank you for everything. Let me know if I can help. They didn't have to say more. That quiet echo of respect, that was my legacy, not Nora's speeches, not her spotlight. Mine was in the people who never forgot who helped them rise. And just like that, the silence between us became strategy. By Saturday afternoon, that silence shattered. I was still in my robe, barefoot in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle when my phone lit up. Silas had texted, "Check your email now." I opened my inbox. The top message was from a journalist I hadn't spoken to in years. The subject line made my chest tighten. Co-founder break down Rock's health brand's leadership. Attached was a link. I clicked. The press release wasn't subtle. It painted a picture of me as unstable, fragile, erratic. Sources close to the company claimed I had suffered a quiet collapse following a series of emotionally disruptive episodes. One line stood out. Leadership restructuring was necessary to protect investors from volatility rooted in unresolved grief. I didn't move. Not for a full minute. The kettle screamed in the background, and I let it. By the time I turned the burner off, 4 more emails had come in. One from an ex-colleague, brief but cautious. Hope you're okay, no comment, of course. Another from a vendor I'd worked with for 8 years. Amara, I was surprised to read this. Can we touch base when things settle? And the third from my former assistant, Kiera. Saw the article, this isn't you, stay strong. My phone rang. Silas again. She's playing dirty, he said without greeting. She's trying to reframe the entire narrative before Monday's call. I noticed, I replied flatly. Are you okay? I stared at the cabinet above the stove, eyes unfocused. "She's making this personal," I said. "So now so am I." "Personal?" Silas's voice sharpened. "Amara, she's telling investors you leaked sensitive data to a competitor. She's setting you up for a lawsuit." I gripped the phone tighter. "Then she's about to learn what evidence looks like." I hung up. I didn't cry, but I did open the hall closet and reach for a box I hadn't touched since the year I passed the bar. Inside, under old copies of the Blue Book and a dusty case of legal pads, was the frame. The certificate was still crisp. Amara Calloway, jurist doctor, admitted to practice, Georgia Bar. They thought I'd forgotten who I was. They were wrong. Later that day, I stepped into the co-working space near Bay and Reynolds, the same one I used to host early investor pitches when we were just starting out. It smelled like ambition and coffee, memories I'd shelved. I settled into a corner table and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Proof, strength, some reason not to feel humiliated all over again. That's when I saw her, Kira. She approached quietly, glancing around before sitting across from me. She pulled a flash drive from her bag and slid it forward like it was contraband. "I know what she's saying about you. And I know it's not true," she said softly. "This is from the Slack archive, a private Zoom she thought no one saved. I didn't leak it, but I kept it. I thought you might need it." I blinked. "Kira, don't thank me. Just don't tell anyone I gave it to you." Then she was gone. I hesitated, then plugged it in. The file auto-played, Nora's voice crystal clear, mocking. "She's been broken since her dad died. Give her a mic and she folds. She can't even look her reflection in the mirror without cracking." My hands balled into fists. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. That voice, my cousin's voice, was laughing. I closed the laptop. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't sadness either. It was something sharper, a storm that had waited too long to speak. I sat in that co-working space, surrounded by clattering keyboards, and whispered meetings, and whispered to myself, "So that's what they think of me? Then let's show them who I really am." I pulled out my phone and typed, "Amara, I'm coming to the Monday investor call. No more hiding." Silas's response came within seconds. "Good. They picked the wrong woman to bury." And I realized maybe this wasn't war. Maybe it was correction, and I was the red pen. Before I left, I accessed Nora's cloud drive using the anonymous tip. There it was. Files detailing payments to the shell vendor, signed by Nora N. Carter. My hands shook as I downloaded everything, whispering, "You thought I'd stay quiet, didn't you?" That Monday morning, I didn't sip tea or pace in the hallway like I used to before big meetings. I sat quietly at my desk in the corner of the apartment, the same place I'd taken every investor call for the last 10 years. My laptop was already open. My finger hovered over the Zoom link and I clicked. Boxes appeared one by one, faces framed in polished home offices and filtered lighting, 25 participants in total, investors, advisors, legacy board members. Most of them avoided looking directly at me. But one face didn't. Nora. She was in full CEO mode. Sleek bun, red lipstick, that soft, focused background of exposed brick, and a fiddle leaf fig. She smiled faintly, like she knew something no one else did. "Good morning, everyone," she said like nothing was wrong. "Let's get started with a quick update on leadership," I unmuted. Her eyes flicked ever so slightly. "Actually," I said evenly, "before we do that, I'd like to clarify a few things." Silence fell so fast it nearly buzzed. Someone coughed. Another leaned back in their chair. Amara, a senior partner from Charlotte, began, clearly uncomfortable. "We were told you'd stepped away." I kept my voice calm, controlled. I didn't step away. I was removed without a vote, without cause. Despite contributing nearly 2/3 of the company's top-line revenue through client acquisition and back-end development, I heard someone shift on the other end. The audio picked it up like a stiff wind. I developed the user experience funnel that drove our conversion rate from 7% to 24% in under 12 months. I brought in our flagship health platform deal, $3,200,000, 0 cents annually. And I have time-stamped Git logs to prove every line of code I authored. My eyes never left Nora's, but more than that, I said, I gave this company its core, its values, its story that wasn't built in a boardroom, that came from late-night sleepless weeks and a very personal reason why I started this with you in the first place. The you lingered, Nora smirked. Then she leaned forward, chin resting in her hand, and tilted her head like a therapist faking empathy. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice dripping with saccharine venom. You didn't get the memo. She reached to her side and pulled up a file. I filed Form 1133 with the State Secretary's office last Thursday. You're no longer recognized as a legal co-founder. It's already done. Done? I shot back, my voice cutting through the virtual room. You think a forged filing erases 14 years? I have the original trust, Nora, and it doesn't say what you think it does. Her smirk faltered, just for a moment. A ripple moved through the room. Someone whispered, Wait, what? Another voice asked, Can she even do that without a vote? Nora's smile widened. Turns out she signed her rights away years ago. Remember the 2019 reorg? My throat tightened. My heart did not. Because I did remember. But I also remembered every red-lined clause, and Silas already had a copy of the final version. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I simply reached for the screen recording button, clicked it, and left the call. The laptop screen faded to black. I sat there for a moment, surrounded by quiet. Then I leaned back in my chair, stared up at the ceiling fan as it made its slow circle, and reached for my phone. There was one call I needed to make. A voice answered after 2 rings. Benson, Tate, and Lane, how may I direct your call? This is Amara Calloway, I said clearly. I'd like to speak to someone about unlawful co-founder removal and corporate fraud. A pause, then, wait. You're the co-founder they tried to cut out, right? I smiled just slightly. That's the one. The receptionist at Benson, Tate, and Lane remembered me, and maybe that was the first surprise of the day. Not because I expected to be forgotten, but because it had been years since I last stepped through that heavy oak door with anything close to confidence. But this time, I wasn't here to second-guess a contract. I was here to protect everything I'd built, from someone who shared my blood, but none of my principles. I was escorted upstairs. The boardroom was sleek, glass walls, minimalist wood paneling, and not a single inch of wasted space. Claudia Mercer walked in precisely at 3:07 p.m., all-navy suit and zero fluff. She sat across from me and opened the folder without small talk. I liked her already. I've reviewed the Form 1133 filings, she said, tapping her pen on the edge of the paper. Your original equity documentation and IP contracts are intact. What they submitted, doctored. Not sloppily, but not enough to hold up in court. I leaned in slightly, nodding once. Her eyes met mine. This isn't just wrongful removal, Miss Calloway. It's corporate fraud. Those 3 words should have hit like thunder, but all I felt was quiet. Claudia leaned forward, her voice lowering. There's more. We found an email from Nora to Carter dated last month. She wrote, Amara's out by Q2, no matter the cost. They planned this, Amara. Every step. I clenched my jaw, nodding. Then let's make sure they pay for it. While her associate gathered the necessary motions for an emergency injunction, I scanned the list of evidence. Git logs, email chains, the NDA with the red line Nora had missed, and the system logs. Every client contact that tied their trust to my name, not just the brand. By the time I left the firm, Savannah had begun to dim. The spring sunset painted the skyline with brushstrokes of coral and violet. I walked the long way back to my apartment down River Street just to breathe. It was a false peace. That night, as I reheated leftover lentil stew, my phone buzzed, then again and again. I wiped my hands and picked it up. 4 unread messages. "Hey, I heard what's happening. Are you okay? Someone's saying you had a breakdown. Nora said you were hospitalized a few years ago. Why is she telling people you stole back-end code from a startup in Atlanta?" I stood still, spoon mid-air, stew forgotten. The smear campaign had begun, and Nora wasn't pulling punches. I opened my laptop, checked LinkedIn. Sure enough, anonymous tip-offs were being shared under vague posts about co-founder instability and stealing proprietary code. She was rewriting my identity in real time, turning my silence into an admission of guilt. I stared at the blinking cursor in a half-written tweet. "There's always someone ready to burn down the house they didn't build just to watch you freeze." My finger hovered. I could feel the pressure in my throat again, the one I knew well, the one that used to come in waves after Dad's funeral when Nora made backhanded comments like, "Some people just fall apart under pressure, huh?" That night I got a call from an old friend, Lena, her voice shaking. "Amara, Nora's team contacted my firm, asking us to drop you as a reference. They said you're toxic." I told them to shove it, but how far is she going to take this? I exhaled slowly. "As far as she can, Lena, but she's not ready for me." I stared at the tweet. Then, with a slow breath, I hit delete. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them post. I didn't need to explain myself to an audience cheering for the villain with better PR. I closed Twitter, walked to the hall closet, and from behind a pile of old sweaters, I pulled out the small silver hard drive Grandma gave me the week after our seed funding hit. "Someday," she said, "the truth won't need your voice. It'll have your files." I hadn't touched it in 5 years, but tonight it would become the most important witness I had. I plugged it in. The soft hum was almost comforting. Every commit, every time-stamped client contract, every Slack thread where Nora had said, "You handle the tech, I'll spin the story." I started creating a folder, labeled it Quiet Spring Defense, and I smiled, not because it was over, but because I knew exactly where to begin. The hard drive had done its job, but that was only half the battle. Truth was no longer something to store. It had to be delivered. By Wednesday evening, I was on a plane to Seattle. I barely slept that night, though the hotel bed was soft and the room faced the quiet sound. My mind replayed every headline Nora's PR machine had dropped. Visionary female CEO launches bold new chapter. Nora bio reimagined under Soul leadership, each one more carefully curated than the last, all omitting the word that mattered most, co-founder. Thursday morning came quick. I skipped breakfast, but not nerves. They followed me into the conference center like an uninvited shadow. The ballroom buzzed with industry names, rows of pearl earrings, designer blazers, and curated empathy, the kind of space where polished betrayal could pass for brilliance if no one dared interrupt. Nora stepped on stage, as if she'd been born to stand there. Navy dress, hair in a perfect chignon, a wide smile stretched across her face, but her eyes were scanning. She saw me, didn't blink. I didn't flinch either. Claudia sat to my left, one of our seed round investors, Evelyn Shen, to my right. Neither said a word as Nora launched into her keynote, the future of ethical health technology. She moved through the first slides with ease, quoting our data, my system's architecture. Even one line I'd written in a 2018 internal memo. Health isn't a product. It's a promise backed by design. I'd written that on a sticky note the day after Dad died. At the 13-minute mark, just as she queued up her grand rebrand pitch, a stage assistant walked across the floor. Nora kept talking. The assistant stepped closer, handed her a cream envelope. She paused. That smile, tight, camera-ready, stayed on her lips for a moment too long. The projector behind her blinked, a flicker of white, then a full-screen error message. I watched, not with joy but clarity, like watching a faucet finally drip after hours of pressure. Nora cleared her throat. Small tech issue, she said brightly. Let's pivot to Q&A while our team resets. Mics were placed in the aisles. Attendees lined up with questions about biotech ethics, user data integration, and remote diagnostics. I waited, not in line, just seated still. Then, as the fifth question wrapped, I rose. My heels clicked softly on the aisle carpet. People turned. Nora's gaze froze. I stopped at the mic, adjusted it, and spoke. Hi, I'm Amara Calloway, former CTO and co-founder of Nora Bio. A hush rippled. I kept my tone even. What you've seen today, the product model, client interface, and design language, is based on proprietary work developed by me without consent. This matter is now under legal review. A man 4 rows up dropped his pen. Another woman whispered, Wait, is that her cousin? Nora's face didn't move, but her hand slowly dropped from the clicker. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult. I didn't apologize. I just stood there, letting the weight of truth take up the air she'd spent months filling with spin. Security didn't approach me. No moderator cut my mic. Instead, Evelyn leaned in and whispered, That's all we needed. After the session, I stepped into the corridor. The first person to find me wasn't security. It was an investor I didn't recognize, one who handed me his card and said, We've been watching this unfold, and frankly, it's about time someone called it what it is. Another woman followed. I interned at Nora last year. We knew. We all knew. By the time I reached the elevator, my hands were full of cards. Not weapons, not shields, but witnesses. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just said the truth out loud, and somehow that was louder than any scream. I didn't need to raise a sword. I just had to show them the truth they'd tried so hard to bury and let it speak louder than I ever could. That was Thursday. By Saturday night, Nora's team filed a motion in federal court. They accused me of stealing proprietary back-end code, claimed I'd used trade secrets from a rival firm, and passed them off as mine. By Monday morning, the headlines had turned. Cousins at war. IP scandal shakes female-founded biotech. Once co-founders, now courtroom enemies. It was a storm, fast, ruthless, and utterly manufactured. I sat in the law firm's conference room in downtown Portland, staring at the giant binder Claudia dropped in front of me. Her injunction request is flimsy, she said, flipping through tabbed exhibits, but it's loud, and loud wins, headlines, not hearings. We'll dismantle it. I nodded, even though my stomach had been clenched since sunrise. Silas texted from outside, You want me to be in the gallery? I replied, No, I need you in the lab. Keep building. We headed to court just before 9. The courthouse looked the same as it always did, tall, plain, and indifferent. The security guard who scanned my purse didn't know he was checking the bag of the woman Nora was trying to erase. Just another morning, just another case. But once inside Department 5, things sharpened. Nora sat across the aisle with her new legal team, not her usual polished crew. These were PR-hardened, camera-friendly litigators. One wore a pinstriped suit so stiff I could hear it rustle when he leaned over. Nora didn't look at me, but I could feel her presence the way you feel a wasp circling your head. Calm on the outside, venom under the surface. The judge entered. The room rose. Proceedings began. It was all procedural until Claudia asked for permission to enter an estate file addendum into the record. Your Honor, she said evenly, this document was sealed by the Calloway family estate and held by a third-party trust. It was only opened under court order related to the IP review. The judge nodded. A clerk approached the bench, handed the manila envelope forward. I hadn't seen it before. Neither had Nora. As the judge opened it, he raised an eyebrow. Then he read it aloud. Clause 18.3. In the event of organizational dispute, full creative authority and IP rights shall revert to the co-founder who authored the original UX and platform design, namely Miss Amara Calloway, per notarized submission and time-stamped Git record. The courtroom fell still. I didn't move, not even when Nora's attorney leaned forward and whispered something panicked into her ear. She blinked. Once. Twice. The judge continued. This clause predates your Form 1133 filing by 5 years. Miss Calloway never relinquished her stake. In fact, she's listed here as having majority control in the event of internal dissolution. He placed the document down, and just like that, the air shifted. Nora's expression cracked. Not publicly, not theatrically, just enough. A twitch of disbelief, a single intake of breath too sharp to hide. Claudia didn't gloat, I didn't smile. I folded my hands in my lap and let the silence spread. The kind of silence that fills the lungs when truth finally lands after being silenced too long. The judge cleared his throat. We'll break for recess. I'd advise counsel for Miss Vance to reconsider the merits of their case before we proceed. I stood slowly. My legs felt heavy, but my chest was light, not from triumph, from something older, deeper, a kind of uncoiling. As we stepped into the hallway, Claudia leaned toward me. Your grandmother filed that clause in 2017. Probably knew this day might come. I didn't speak, but inside a warmth bloomed. Not joy, not pride, relief. Relief that someone had believed in me before I knew I'd need them to. As reporters flooded the lobby and cameras angled for a glimpse of the cousins at war, I kept walking, past the noise, past the flashbulbs, into the sun. Some losses don't take your breath away, they give it back. 3 weeks had passed since the hearing, but it still lived in the back of my mind like the final click of a safe. Quiet. Final. Irrevocable. That morning, I drove out early before the heat settled, before the world remembered who I was. The old house was gone, sold off during probate, but Grandma's garden still stood, half wild, half loyal. The lavender had crept into the sage, and the peonies bowed heavy with neglect, but it was still her space. I walked the old cobblestone path slowly, running my fingertips across the chipped wooden railings. The roses were overgrown, rebellious in a way that made me smile. I paused under the plum tree, sat on the rusted bench, and pulled the letter from my bag. The paper was soft, yellowing at the edges. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Slightly slanted blue ink, always in cursive. Amara, if you're reading this, I didn't do my job soon enough. You were never second. I just thought you didn't need me to say it. I was wrong. You were always the one holding things together, even when it wasn't your job, too. I'm sorry I let others think otherwise, Grandma. I sat still for a while, listening to the wind shuffle through dry leaves. I didn't cry. I didn't need to anymore. By late afternoon, I drove back down to the new Portland campus. My campus. No more Nora's signature on the doors. No more sidelong glances wondering if I still belonged. A modest plaque had been installed the week before, the Harrow Center for Cellular Discovery. I parked in the back and came through the staff entrance the same way I always used to. Habit, maybe humility. As I stepped inside, the receptionist glanced up and smiled. Welcome back, Dr. Harrow. She said it like it had always been mine. I nodded, returned the smile, and walked down the hallway toward the office they'd set aside for me. Not corner, not flashy, but it faced the campus trees and had space for whiteboards and coffee rings. I stood in the doorway a moment before walking in. The walls were still bare, the desk clean, but the second drawer on the right, Grandma's drawer, the one I'd brought from the old lab, waited. I pulled it open slowly. There it was. The ivory pen, still smooth, still cool to the touch. The one she'd given me when I got into Berkeley. I hadn't used it in years, Not since before Nora and I split roles, not since I stopped feeling like anything I built would last long enough to sign. But now there was something to finish. On the table in front of me sat the final transfer agreement, with Nora's resignation and full shareholder reallocation. No clause untouched, no digits missing. My attorney had already done the hard work. This was the last fold in the page, the signature that closed the door. I uncapped the pen, paused, took one deep breath, then wrote my name, slowly, deliberately. No shaking hand, no clenched jaw, just presence. Amara Calloway, co-founder and creative director. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even triumph. It was balance. It was mine. I placed the pen down gently and looked outside. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the quad. Students walked by with coffee and lab coats and earbuds, oblivious to the years it took to carve this space open, and that was okay. Legacy isn't about being known. It's about knowing what you built, quietly, stubbornly will hold after you leave the room. I stepped outside into the fading day, into whatever was next. Some names are heavy until you carry them for.